We are turning our attention to matters on the pitch, though, because it is the United States against the Netherlands in the World Cup final on Sunday. And Rebecca Myers, journalist with the Sunday Times, is on the line. Good morning to you, Rebecca.
Good morning, hi.
Very well. How are you?
Good, thank you, very good.
So, Danielle van de Donk, this is the interesting quote that I've seen this week. She says, "I don't think they think we're that good." Did the United States underestimate the Netherlands going into Sunday's final?
I would be surprised, if they didn't have an element of maybe they've won this already. I think obviously they've faced to be fair to them, they faced France in the quarterfinals and us in the semi-finals, two teams who they considered the favourites by a long way. So there is every chance that they're looking at the Netherlands going, well, job done at this stage. They'd be fools to do so, I think, and that could well be their undoing. But yeah, I think Danielle van de Donk has a great point in that they're probably certainly not looking at them, maybe in the way that they were looking at France and England.
Is some of this to do with the fact that the Dutch have risen so quickly? Of course, they're European champions, but this is their second consecutive major final, of course, as a result of the Euros a couple of years ago. But this is only their second World Cup. Their domestic league in women's football was only established in 2007, so they don't have the same rich heritage that the United States have.
Yeah, exactly. And they also don't have the same kind of, even though England obviously haven't necessarily achieved as much on paper success now as the Dutch, I think we've got a little bit more of an aura to our team than the Dutch have built up. We've been very upfront in this tournament about saying, we're gonna win the World Cup, whereas the Dutch haven't really been doing that as much. They're a bit more of an unknown. And yeah, like you said, they've just risen so fast. I think people have been quite taken aback by how well they've done. So the US are just one of those groups who are looking at this team thinking, wow, maybe we did not expect to face these guys in the final.
No, at the same time, though, I guess the arrogance is a hallmark of this United States team. It is how they manage to channel their best selves into their best form or performances. I mean, the exponent of that may be something like tea drinking celebrations or shouting at your opponent in the mix zone after a game, and maybe people find that distasteful, particularly the mix zone thing. But ultimately, the arrogant form of the United States team is the best form of the United States team when it comes to results.
Yeah, I mean, it's catch-22, right? Because they have every reason to be arrogant. There's no reason to suggest that they're being above their station because they're winning. But also, I think particularly for the Brits, we find it a little bit odd. We're not so sure about all this, tea drinking. It's very unusual for us to see. But I think a lot of people who, especially kind of fans of the men's game who are coming across to women's football, are sort of saying, well, you want these characters. You want these sort of slightly arrogant, slightly cocky sort of tea drinking, taking the mick. That's football. You want those characters and those sort of slightly outrageous moments. And I think that there's merit in that as well, as much as I have to say it wasn't my favourite celebration.
There's going to be question marks around Megan Rapinoe going into Sunday's final, and Rose Lavelle as well. I think she's struggling with a hamstring injury too. That will surely give the Dutch a huge amount of hope, looking at these two huge stalwarts for the United States potentially absent. Have you got a sense at all whether or not the two of them are going to start or not, or feature at all?
Yeah, it's very hard to read at this stage. I mean, I have, first and foremost, I'd say I looked at the starting list the other day at the match and saw that Megan Rapinoe wasn't on it, and turned around to my colleague and said, we're going to win the World Cup. Didn't quite work out like that. So I think Megan Rapinoe, although she is this extraordinary footballer and an extraordinary person, they have players who can fill her position. She's not... it's not the case, I think, if you took Steph Houghton out of our team, things would start to crumble. Things don't crumble without Megan. Rose Lavelle, on the other hand, although she's a bit of an unknown quantity for a lot of opposition teams, I think she is much more the kind of player that you remove and things start to fall away around her. She's very much a playmaker. She's incredibly talented. So without her, I think things could get quite interesting for the Dutch.
Yeah, for sure. That is a much bigger loss than I think people realise this weekend. One of the elements when it comes to the legacy of this World Cup, when it comes to the profile that this World Cup has given to the game, one of the things we can point to Sunday's game on a real positive level is the fact that we've got two women coaches on the sideline. Quite often it's pointed to the team saying, well, there's a man leading the team, and what does that actually do for women coaches who actually want to make it? This sends a very, very positive message, doesn't it?
It's incredible, yeah. And we had, at the start of the tournament, last World Cup, there were 8 female coaches out of 24. This World Cup, there were 9. So it didn't exactly look like, great and wonderful progress. But as we've got further and further through the knockout rounds, the women have gone up to sort of, from a third to a half of those represented, from a half to now, the 100% of the coaches left of the tournament. I think that says an awful lot about being a female coach in the women's game. I spoke to Emma Hayes, the Chelsea coach, who's been doing a column for us this World Cup about this, and she said, obviously there's the argument that maybe you have to be twice as good to get this far as a woman. I think that's very, very valid. But also she said, we don't really know, how important it is to be a woman or to coach women the right way, because we've not really done any research into it. Research, generally speaking, is done into the men's game, into male players, into how they react to stuff. We don't yet really know what the edge you might have if you're a female coach in the women's game, what you might be bringing to that. And we're obviously seeing that it's working.
Yeah, for sure. Like, the idea then for the sport, I guess, is how do we double down on what's happened over the last couple of weeks, because it's been a brilliant World Cup. The controversy has only created the theatre around the World Cup. It's hard to pick too many negatives around it whatsoever. The question, though, I think you've alluded to this to yourself in a few of your pieces, is how does the sport itself double down on this?
Yeah, and I mean, even just yesterday was quite a wake-up call for me, because Gilly Flaherty, who's a former England player and captain of West Ham, which is, a fully professional team now, just tweeted saying, guys, I've not got any boots for the season. I've not got a boot sponsor. I've not got a kit sponsor. And you saw in her replies some people tweeting back sort of saying, well, are you joking? Like, is this are you just sort of having some kind of laugh about this? And she was like, no, I'm completely serious. And I think I retweeted that just because I think people don't realise the sort of level that a lot of the women's game is at. This is fantastic. This has been amazing. It has been game-changing, and I do think we'll look back at it as a tipping point. But unless we work properly and seriously on major issues like that, basic issues like that, and grassroots issues, then, we've got ages until we're going to achieve anything resembling equality.
Rebecca, there's been talk over the last few days about the Premier League taking over the WSL over in England. Do you think that's a positive move? They talk about TV deals or TV rights deals for women's football as well, and the counter-argument would be make it more visible, keep it on terrestrial TV. So how do you think that would be about progression for the women's game as well?
It's a really difficult one, and I think, to be honest, I sort of think that what is going to happen will happen, and obviously once the ball gets rolling in these things, they can move suddenly quite quickly. I think the main thing is that TV rights of some kind are secured. So historically, the Women's League, the tender that is kind of currently coming to an end, the rights were essentially given away for free. The arrangement was that the broadcasters, which was BBC and BT, would pay production costs, but nothing else. So the rights are kind of gifted in a way. That's fine to get it out there, but actually it's not turning a profit, and it means that there's this unsustainable model where the women's teams have to kind of rely on the money from the men's teams. We can't have that going forward, because it doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't work for the women or the men. It doesn't work for the clubs, and it will, I think, jeopardise the future of the league. So in some ways, I'm of the opinion that whichever way we secure those TV rights will be the right way, as long as it's done, as long as there's money changing hands. That maybe is the most important thing at this stage, and we possibly can't be too choosy.
Is it a positive move, though, that the Premier League do take over running of the women's game, though?
Yes and no. It adds weight. I think it's not dissimilar to the way we talk about the example I always give is of the Champions League game, where you had the PSG fans with knuckle dusters. Not saying the Premier League fans with knuckle dusters, but there's an element of traditional bastions of the men's game coming into the women's game, or organisations like the Premier League getting involved. There will be negatives, and there will be things that people who have long loved the women's game will not like about that. But it adds huge weight to say that the Premier League, invest in the women's game or care about the women's game enough is a huge stepping stone. So I think you can argue both sides, but if it happens, then we need to look at all the positives and embrace that.
Who's going to win on Sunday, Rebecca?
I think it's hard to argue the Netherlands, but I wouldn't mind seeing the Netherlands win. I think it would be wonderful for European football. I'm biased.
A little bit more humble. That's what it would be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also it would be fascinating to see, and I don't necessarily know that the US are going to do this. I think they're probably too smart. But if they did underestimate them, and if they did sort of walk into this final already thinking they'd secured the win, that would be a great story for football. It would be really interesting to watch. Finally, the world champions who've just assumed that the trophy is already on their mantelpiece. Finding out that it's a little bit harder.
Come on, Netherlands, I think it's fair to say. Rebecca, thanks a million for taking the call this morning.
Thanks so much.
Rebecca Myers, journalist with the Sunday Times there on the line. It's a 4 o'clock kickoff on Sunday, the Netherlands against the USA, and it should be a great one.